Hi, and welcome back to David Pattinson's Accused Friends podcast format. I want to speak today about the tyranny of health passports and specifically break it down to the UK government's deterrent on foreign travel. And this first came to my attention sort of back in October, November time when they were getting ready for lockdown 2. As you might remember, there was the talk of the circuit breaker. We needed like the 2-week circuit breaker lockdown to sort of short circuit the virus, and Boris Johnson said no, that's definitely not what we need. And then, after 2 weeks, decided that we need a full 4-week lockdown instead, which was called Lockdown 2, also known as Lockdown Light. And the thing is with those regulations at Lockdown 2 was that it included this provision that, you're not allowed to travel abroad. And like all these lockdown regulations, they're not really laws, they're government diktats, and they're sort of shrouded under the sort of umbrella of this 1984 Public Health Act to, protect the health of the country. And during the Simon Dolan legal challenge, it uncovered from back in March when the government said, schools have got to close. The government in court said, well, actually, this was just advice. It wasn't, a law. It wasn't legally enforceable. And it's like all these lockdown regulations, there's legal ambiguity around them to such an extent. The government explained them in ambiguous language. The media then back up that ambiguous language with black and white language that's totally unambiguous. And then there's lots of pictures and videos of police sort of imposing and enforcing these regulations, but it gives the government wiggle room in court to say no, these were just recommendations to the public. And of course, going back to lockdown 2, the whole rationale for that lockdown, as you might remember, was to protect the NHS from being overwhelmed. Andrea Leadsom was on the radio saying she couldn't in good conscience vote against it because she wanted to prevent the NHS being overwhelmed. And it really got me thinking about the logic of preventing the NHS being overwhelmed. My suggestion about building more hospitals has sort of fallen on deaf ears. And so, I really thought the next best thing was to encourage British people to leave the country, because if you're out of the country, you're protecting the NHS by default. If you have an injury or an illness, you can't go to the NHS because you're out of the country. You would have to go to a local hospital in your wherever country you're in. And I mean, if you think about it from a mathematical point of view, let's say we had 1% of British people abroad or traveling abroad or out of the country. That would mean that the NHS is 1% less exposed to being overwhelmed than it might be. And it might not sound like a small number, but we're never told about the risk, when we talked about the NHS being overwhelmed, by how many percentage? Is it 1%? Is it 2%? Is it 5%? 70 million population, 1% of that is 700,000. So if we get 700,000 people to travel abroad, NHS has 700,000 fewer people to worry about. And again, further on this point, skeptics of what I'm saying would say, well, look, you travel abroad, you might bring the virus home. But of course, the virus is out of control in Britain. I mean, Matt Hancock said it's out of control. Sadiq Khan says it's out of control. There's no one doubting really that the virus is out of control from the government point of view. So if the virus is out of control in Great Britain, surely leaving Great Britain is going to be sort of a safety option. I mean, if you're on a sinking ship, finding the nearest lifeboat is the logical solution to that problem. So if you're in a country like Great Britain, you've got the virus out of control, surely leaving the country is, a logical solution to that problem. Yet the government don't want people to leave the country, and I want to try and figure out why that is. I do not know why that is, but it seems illogical. Again, if British citizens are seen as these human transmitters of the virus, surely if you leave the country, you cannot transmit the virus to British citizens on British soil because you're not physically there. Again, another argument in favour of leaving the country. Now, people would say, well, David, let's take your point. Let's take the point that the virus is out of control in Great Britain. Other countries will not be wanting to receive British citizens, so let's just put a ban on it. But of course, why do we not leave that decision up to other countries? There has been a lot of stories, especially leading up to the Brexit deadline, of countries saying, well, we don't want this new mutant strain of the virus in our country, so let's ban British travellers. But not every country has done that. Surely it's at the discretion of the foreign country to decide whether they will admit British citizens, rather than at the discretion of the British government to decide whether we will let them leave, whether we'll make the decision on behalf of the foreign country. Because potentially carrying the coronavirus, even if you have a negative test when you leave or when you arrive, is a downside. But of course, the upside to having British citizens in your country, they spend money on tourism, they invest in the local economy, and there's always the rich cultural diversity. I mean, as you know, over the last 30 years, Britain's been totally gorging on the rich cultural diversity of foreign immigrants, people from Nigeria, from Mogadishu, from Yemen, from Somalia. Every time they come in, we're told, look, we get the cost, but we get the benefit of the rich cultural diversity. And I've always said, why can other countries not rationally have the rich cultural diversity of British citizens in their country? We should be exporting the rich cultural diversity of our country and our people into foreign countries, and I don't think there's any better time to do that than right now. So why is it then that despite all these positive arguments in favour of leaving Great Britain, of foreign travel, are British citizens is the British government so reluctant to allow it? And I looked into this with a lawyer back in pretty sure it was early November, and the conclusion that was given to me was that there's no legal basis for the British government to ban British citizens from leaving the country. They cannot do it. So they can advise against it. So they can say that you can't travel abroad, but then you can. And I flew out to Florida in November, booked a one-way trip. There was a provision in the regulations that you could travel for business purposes only. I was not asked at the airport if I was traveling for business purposes. I just, checked in, did the passport stuff, answered some questions from people at the gate, and got on a plane and it flew out of Great Britain. And I've spoken to some friends recently that did a flight out of Britain in early January, and they were saying same sort of thing. There's lots of patrol people at the airport, border patrol. They don't want you to leave, but there's nothing they can really do to stop you. So why is it, again, that the government does not want people to leave? I think a few theories I have on this, and I'd be interested in your thoughts. But a few theories I have are, firstly, that the government does not want a sort of a stampede out of the country. It would undermine their authority if the airports are packed, people are pouring in there en masse. It creates this sort of runaway panic that we've got to get out of Great Britain, because tyranny is closing in, and any other country will do. So I think that is a PR negative they want to avoid. Number two is they don't want British people to go to foreign destinations where there is no lockdown, where there is no out of control virus, where there is no, deaths, daily deaths, tolls being bandied about through the news media, and then report back to their British friends and relatives, yeah, what's all this hysteria in Britain when, where I am is totally normal. And I can certainly speak for myself. I mean, I'm in Florida right now, totally normal living. I went to Belarus a couple of times in the autumn, totally normal living. I'm aware there's plenty of other locations in the world, totally normal living. So why is it in Britain that it's got to be a police state? Why has it got to be virus out of control? No matter how many lockdowns you do, it's only ever going to get worse. Whereas in other parts of the world, kind of no problem with the same coronavirus. So maybe someone can answer that for me. I think there's also a purpose behind the no travel agenda with the British government, and it's to do with keeping money in the country. They want to be able to, they can't tax income anymore because no one's working, but they want to be taxing existing wealth, and they want to try and shut off the avenues for people to get their wealth out of the country. I'm sure, it's like all these things, where there's a will, there's a way. But, they want to turn off those spigots of wealth exiting Great Britain, so that when they turn around with the wealth tax, which will probably be this spring, the money will be there for them to seize rather than having escaped. But, the bottom line, I think, in my message and in this podcast is that if you want to leave Great Britain, no one is going to stop you right now. You can book a flight online, you can go down to the airport, you can get on the plane will take off, and then you're out of the country, and there's not going to be any repercussions because legally the government cannot stop you from traveling. Now, I think there is this agenda towards health passports, where the government want to be able to track everyone's movements, and they want to give permission for movements and for freedom based on, good behavior, politically correct behavior. And I think this is where all this is going. This is the sort of the tyranny of health passports that I want to warn against. As everyone knows, in a free society, you're free fundamentally. You're innocent till proven guilty. You have freedom of association, you have freedom of religious worship. And what's happened through this lockdown crisis is the government has cancelled all your civil liberties, but will now give them back to you based on you meeting their criteria, you getting the negative COVID test, you getting supporting the government agenda. And of course, the government is the sort of the judge and jury of the coronavirus tests. I've been reading in the news about some of these health passport companies saying, yeah, we're going to be running everything we do through the NHS. Well, why aren't you running it through private medicine? Why is it the NHS has to be the center of, authority on healthcare when they're just there, in the event of a worst case scenario? And through this crisis, we've had to lock the country down because they are not able to cope. So if they're not able to cope with the virus, why are we giving them more work on the health passports? Why don't we give them less work on the health passports and sub out the health passport authority to the private sector, to private medicine? I'm pretty concerned about why these positive COVID tests or the negative COVID tests all have to be delivered by the government. Why can't they be delivered by your personal doctor down the road, by the private sector? How do we know that these tests are being conducted in a fair way? Do you have the right of appeal? If you get a positive test, do you have the right to appeal like you would perhaps if you had a breathalyzer test? If you were stopped for speeding, you can check if the device is working correctly. You can see if the device is properly calibrated. Well, what if the government starts to manipulate these health passports and the positive and negative tests? Let's say you're going to an anti-lockdown protest. You need to get your negative test, but of course, the morning of the protest, you suddenly get a positive test. So you've got to isolate for 10 days. What if you want to go to a Black Lives Matter protest, though? What kind of test comes back then? Oh, well, then you get a negative test. You can go straight to the Black Lives Matter protest, no problem. And on it goes. What if you want to do, set up your private business? You want to have you want to leave the country, let's say. You're going to the airport that morning, all of a sudden you get positive test, your trip's cancelled. But if you're going to an event, you're going to support gay rights, you're doing a gay rights fundraiser, you do your test in the morning, all of a sudden that's negative, no problem, you can go and do that. So the government's able to control people's behavior through the allowing access to their freedom through positive and negative tests, through the health passports, rather than the fundamental principle of civil liberties, which is why the government's in violation of the law, which is civil liberties supersede government laws, government regulations. Civil liberties are set in stone in the English Bill of Rights. The government does not have the authority to override civil liberties like they're doing, and it's why they're in violation of the law. And so I hope you like this podcast and it's provided food for thought. I think exiting Great Britain is a great decision at the moment. I think if anyone wishes to leave, I don't think you're going to be stopped from doing so today. But, obviously that may change down the road, despite, the government's proclamations that, foreign travel is currently banned. So please leave your comments below. Please subscribe to the channel, and we'll look forward to talking with you soon.